All right, so we are back to record the last bits of our video for the lamp. Really, we just want to do the switch, and we want to show how to do like a chord, right? So that's going to give us the opportunity to look a little more at spline modeling again. It's going to give us the ability to look a little bit more at other things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to File, of course, right? And we're going to go to Set Project, right? Because this is coming to Maya for the first time. So we go for today, and we go File, Set Project, right? Remember, we don't have to create a project every time because we've already created project 2, and we're going to have 2 models for this, right? The lamp and the room itself, that all the furniture and stuff that we're making for the first couple projects is going to go into. So we don't have to create a project every time. Of course, we'll do 4 more projects, right? So we'll see that 4 more times this term. But we do need to go to Set Project to make it the active project. So we go File, Set Project. And of course, it brings up my browser, which is taking forever. There we go. And of course, we can find it, which is Project 2 right here. Now remember, you don't go into the project itself, and it's really just a folder, right? But you do select the folder itself, and you say Set. And that's now your active project. So now I can go File, Open Scene, and of course you'll see it goes right to that project, but it goes into the folder. So remember, when you create this project, it's really just a folder that has other folders inside of it that have labels, right? And what you can do is you can put your scenes in there, our source images folders where we can put our pictures, right, that we use as reference for our stuff in there. And of course, what it does is when you have a project active, it knows where to find everything, right? Because particularly images, right? Pictures that are either used as references on your free image planes, or as we get to later projects in the term, not for a couple more projects, textures, right? When we actually start to paint textures, those are images also. And so your project allows you to put those all in one folder that's got a bunch of other folders in it that you can move around to different computers if you need to. And of course, that stuff always knows where to point, right? It knows where to look for those textures, those images. Those images are not saved in the Maya scene, right? The Maya is looking for them outside of it and then loading them in. So it needs to know where to find those, particularly if you move around to different computers a lot, right? And that's what projects really allow for. So we select on lamp and we open it. Don't save because we don't want to save over that. And there's the lamp where we left off from last week. And we really got it almost finished, right? We had the lampshade built, of course, the lamp base, our spokes, and that allowed us to see duplicate special, and even our light bulb and our brace, right? Now, one of the things to keep in mind, sometimes if you have a lot of crashing on Maya, sometimes that might just be you have to turn your computer off, come back to it a little bit. Sometimes software just gets weird and janky, and restarting the computer or shutting it down, giving it a bit of time, you can come back to it. But sometimes what can happen is, remember, your actual smooth preview can be turned up a lot higher than you think it is, right? Right now we have smooth preview on, so 1 turns it to low res, 3 is smooth preview. We introduced that, right, on this lamp with our light bulb and with the brace, and we're going to see it more times as we come on different projects, so you're going to get reinforcement of it. But page up and page down on your keyboard control the resolution, right? So page down, you'll see, goes down to level 1, and you can page down again, it goes to the lowest. Generally, you're going to get best performance with like level 1 or level 2, right? So page up and page down go up and down the smooth preview resolutions. But you saw you keep going up to level 4, 5, 6, and what that can do is that can actually make this really, really dense. You guys might not have this up, like the polygon count stuff right here. If you go to display, heads up display, you'll see I've got poly count checked on, right? So display, heads up display actually does give you the ability to see your poly count right there. You just check it on. And that'll show all this information right here. And you see at that page up level, it's now at like 136,000 triangles. Now my computer is not too big of a deal. If you've got a pretty nice computer, something you bought in the last year or two for $1,000, it's a good gaming machine, you should be able to run a couple 100,000 polygons in here pretty easily. If you're running on an older machine or a laptop that maybe isn't quite as good, you have to be a lot more careful. So you see as I page down, it goes back down to kind of lower levels, and that's a lot less polygons to work with. So keep that in mind, is there might be that issue where you have too much in smooth preview. So remember, page up, page down allow you to go up and down the resolutions. probably better to stay at the default level 2 that it gives you, or even page down once to go to level 1, right? So page up, page down, they're next to your home and end keys on your keyboard. If need be, you can always go to attribute editor, right, for your object. So remember, you have all these little guys on the side here. They're also right there as well. Modeling toolkit, attribute editor, channel box layer editor, but they're also right here. And attribute editor brings this up. Usually this will be polysurface shape, because polysurface 2 doesn't give you all this information, so you might hit that. That's actually just your history. There's some tweaks, some extrude, so you will actually see history in attribute editor as well. It just goes this way and you don't see all of it. And it gives you a different way to kind of look at it, right? So you can click on that, it gives you a different way to look at the history. So polysurface shape 2 really gives you most of the proper properties you want here. Smooth mesh is where you actually have that control, right? So you can see how it's at level 1, level 2. Page up and page down are just the shortcuts for that, right? So just keep that in mind. And remember, I talked about in a video, if you accidentally hit like Alt-3, it'll turn on the cage on. You'd have to go in here to kind of turn off displacement preview, because that's what controls that cage, and then return that back on. But you do have your subdivision levels that are available there as well. I'm going to go back to modeling toolkit, because remember, modeling toolkit's kind of like your main. All these tools are in everything else. Mesh, edit mesh tools, right? They're all in these. But modeling toolkit just gives you kind of that quicker, easier way to see some of the big ones, right? Just keep that in mind, is that modeling toolkit's just a different way to look at some of the other tools you already have available. But page up, page down kind of allow you to control the actual smooth preview level, right? How many polygons it's subdividing. The higher you go, the more polygons are there, the smoother it looks, but also that hits performance because that's more polygons. So keep that in mind, is that might be something that might affect your performance. If you have a lot of history, remember, it's always good to go to edit, delete by type history to get rid of any of the history that's there. Kind of, things that can sometimes affect performance on an object. Now remember, if you work in smooth preview, you should smooth your model. If I hit 1, right, to turn smooth preview off, it doesn't look that bad, but it does look a lot blockier, right? We are shaping it to look good in smooth preview. So remember that if you're going to work in smooth preview, which is 3, at some point you want to smooth it. At this point, I've kind of basically finished this, right? So if I'm in object mode, right, hold down right mouse button, and it brings up your marking menu, right? Particularly if you have it over your object, it'll do it just for this object, right? If I put my cursor over here and I hold down right mouse menu and I do face, see how it sets that to faces for this back one? So remember, really, you want to usually to have it be the most precise, hold down your right mouse button over your object to get your selection types, right? And we want to be in object mode because I want to smooth the whole object. And remember, there's a tool over here. We kind of saw it on the light bulb, and we're going to see it more. But remember, if you're working in smooth preview, at some point you should smooth. That's my biggest rule. So I'm going to smooth it. What that does is it subdivides at 1 level. That's the default, right? If you want to kind of get rid of this, just hit Q, right? Remember, Q is your quick key for your regular selection tool. So that's great because it gets you back to something quite harmless, which is selecting, right? You can't really screw anything up when you're selecting. I'll select back on the object. And I can hit 1 now to turn it to low res. You see how there's very little difference between that smooth preview and that low res now? And that was the whole awesomeness of smooth, is that you can shape it to look nice when it's smoothed. And so it just makes it so you don't have to add every edge loop in by hand to get that roundness. Can you do that? Yes. Is it wrong to do that? No, but it does take you a little longer. So this is just a cool shortcut when you're working with pretty curved, pretty rounded things. Remember, you don't want to add a million edge loops though, right? Only what you really need, because when you smooth it later on, it's going to add that extra geometry. All right, so now we have a low res on this that looks pretty nice, and smooth preview is just a great shortcut. But remember, if you're going to use smooth preview, you better smooth. Don't break that rule, right? Your low res should look pretty nice. We're just using smooth preview as a great shortcut to make it a little faster and easier to get to that nice looking low resolution shape for pretty rounded curved forms. All right, so just kind of some little reminders about that stuff, and kind of how to avoid some other little problems you might run into performance wise. So now what I want to do is I want to create the switch, right? I want to create a little switch. Now the nice thing is I'm not actually going to show you anything new on this switch. I'm just going to reinforce stuff we've seen before. So the switch we can kind of place here, and it's just going to be a little turn knob switch. Technically, if you really got close to a model, and you needed to see kind of where the switch goes in, you could always kind of extrude some faces, do a circular eyes. We're not going to worry about that on this, right? We're not trying to get every little detail. If you don't really get super close, you're not going to pick up that kind of detail anyways. We're just going to make a switch, just kind of inset it in there. But technically, if you get really close, like your shot is that close, you might need to see kind of an opening for the switch to go into. And that would just be, maybe put a few edge loops here, extrude some faces, do, quick circular eyes, which we saw with our top of our bedpost, make it more of a circle. And then you'd have kind of a nice little opening that looks good that you could put the switch into. We're not going to go that level, right? We're not trying to do every little nut and bolt on these. It's more showing me the general modeling tools that we're trying to go over, so that you're showing me you're learning them, but also just to make the general shapes look pretty good. All right, so the switch really, when we think about it, it's just a cylinder, right? It's a cylinder that's going to get thicker and thinner here and there. It's probably going to have some little knobs that come off. That's not really something new I'm going to show you, but I'm going to show you guys kind of the cool way that extrude along normal direction can be used outside of just thickening. So we're just going to go to create, right? And we're going to create polygon primitives, right? Guys, do not ever freaking use an NURBS primitive. They suck. Some of you guys kind of were actually exploring that and trying to build from that, and you probably found that this is not working well. Of course it's not. NURBS primitives are horrible, right? Yeah, we can use some curve tools and then output polygon meshes later on, but NURBS are just really hard to work with. Polygon primitives. Create polygon primitives, right? That's the primitives you want. So create polygon primitives. And in this case, we want a cylinder, right? Because this shape's going to be much more cylindrical, circular. Now, I'm going to go to the options box, right? Remember, these little check boxes next to them allow you to bring the options up for that. If I just click on cylinder right here, it just makes a cylinder. If I go to the checkbox, if I move my cursor over the checkbox, you'll see I get the options up here. Now, in this case, I do want to make it probably right here, right? And that's the z-axis. So I'll tell it to make it on the z-axis. And I probably want a little bit more. Actually, I think 12 would be okay, but you could always do a little more if you wanted 14 or 16. That's good. It should be even numbers, though. It's always good to work with even numbers for that kind of stuff. If you did like 15, then if you go around and grab every other polygon, you'll have an area where it's not even, right? Where you'll see that there's a bigger gap than there should be for something that's supposed to be uniform, right? So generally, even numbers are much better to work with in most cases. I think 12 actually worked for us. But if you wanted 14 or 16, not a big deal. So I'm going to create. There we go. There's our cylinder. It's a little bit big, right? Remember, Alt, right mouse button, zooms your camera out, right? And remember, this is in all the earlier videos, but I always like to repeat some of these basics because, you don't want to have to go back and rewatch those earlier videos if you've already done that stuff. But remember, Alt right mouse button is your zoom. Alt left mouse button is your rotate. And remember, your scroll wheel, right? If you've got it, you might be sitting here thinking, I don't have a three mouse button. If you have a scroll wheel on your mouse, you do, right? Of course, you can use it as a scroll wheel for zooming, but it's jumpy. But if you press it down, it acts as a button, right? Remember, you don't have to scroll it. You can actually press it down like a button. So Alt middle mouse button moves your camera, right? So remember, treat your scroll wheel generally as a mouse button instead of a scroll wheel. But Alt right mouse button is the better zoom because it's smoother. Alt middle moves, Alt left rotates, right? Remember that. That's going to help your life a lot easier. Also, just feel how comfortable your thumb over the Alt is, right? Other software by default, like Blender, default, if you don't turn on industry compatible, uses Control and Shift for its zooming. And put your fingers over those, and it's not as comfortable as Alt, right? There's a reason why Maya uses Alt and the mouse buttons, because it's actually really, really comfortable and ergonomically very nice, right? I cite Blender. Blender is actually a pretty great piece of software. You just really probably want to turn on industry compatible. Otherwise, it's going to be really different than Maya and ergonomically kind of default dumb. But they added the industry compatible stuff, so Alt for Maya navigation works, QWERTY, right? WER. Also, when you rest your fingers over W, E, and R, right? W for move, E for rotate, R for scale. That's actually very comfortable. Blender, once again, its default stuff's kind of dumb, actually. It's G, R, and S. Put your fingers over G, R, and S and feel how uncomfortable that is compared to W, E, R. Just bad ergonomics. Fortunately, Blender, it's really easy to turn on industry compatible and double click for edge loops, and tons of my stuff, interface stuff is on, which is great. When I use Blender, that's what I use. I have industry compatible on. Because Maya really figured out some of that stuff really well. WER for your selection stuff, Q for regular selection tool, and Alt, left, middle, right mouse button. All right, so just kind of a little bit about that because I want to kind of reinforce that stuff. These are important things that we do again and again. Now in this case, I do want to make this a bit smaller, right? So we hit R for scale, right? R for scale. Remember, they're all right here though, right? Select, move, rotate, scale. Start memorizing those quick keys, guys. Your life will be faster. It's great. It's much faster to hit a quick key on a keyboard than it is to move your cursor way over here to select it, right? Yeah, it's there if you forget, but remember, R for scale. Now in this case, remember there's all these different handles, right? And some of you guys might have had on your first project, you might have made your globe on top thin and it looks more oval-like. That's because you can't just grab one of these handles willy-nilly. That's going to make it more like an oval, right? Remember, you have to left click. And I talked about it in those videos, so remember, pay attention really closely to the videos. If you need to pause it, rewind a little bit, do that, right? If you need to rewatch it once, do it. That's what the videos are there for. You always have access to me in a lecture without having to, ask, for direct help, right? Not that we can't do those private conferences or I won't help you, but the videos are there for when maybe it's 8 or 9 o'clock at night, right? I'm not gonna be in Canvas checking messages at 8 or 9 o'clock at night, guys. So remember, those videos are there. All of this information is in all those videos. Remember, these handles only scale one axis at a time, and so you can easily turn what's supposed to be a cylinder into an oval. Don't do that, right? Remember that there's that center one right here. That's light blue. If you left click drag on that, that scales all 3 down at the same time. And that's what we want in this case. Oh, and I think I accidentally had, let's see here. Yeah, I think I had that one selected by accident. Remember, 4 for wireframe, 5 for shaded, right? 4 for wireframe, 5 for shaded. The buttons are right here though. And that 4 and 5 are the ones that are above QWER, right? They're the numbers that are above your alphabet, below the F1, F2, F3 stuff. All right, so there we go. Because I just noticed that my lampshade disappeared, so I think I was making it smaller with my button, or my switch. So we'll scale this down, but you see how we're using that center one, right? And of course we can hit W for move, and I'm going to grab on the dark blue one, the Z axis, right? Left click drag on that one, move it out a bit. Remember, F on your keyboard, frame selection. F for frame selection. That automatically zooms in your camera on the object or faces that are selected or edge that's selected. And it also sets your camera rotate around that. So think of F for frame selection as kind of like a focus on what's selected. So I'm going to hit R for scale to scale it down some more because we still don't want it to be quite that big. And notice I'm grabbing that center one, right? Now, middle mouse button will do the last activated axis. Remember I kind of talked about that in the last video? If that was my last axis, when I do middle mouse button, I'll do that one. So middle mouse button's a great shortcut, but be careful with it. It's going to do whatever the last axis used is, right? In this case, I'm using the center one, so it'll just scale center. If you're not comfortable with the middle mouse button, don't use it, right? You don't have to use it. You can just use the handles. Now in this case, I want it to be shorter this direction, so I'll just left click drag on the blue. So in this case, I really did want to just scale it on just one axis, right? To make it thinner this direction. I do it this way or this way and we get an oval. And you don't want to do that. You have to be careful which handle you're using, right? These handles are great and easy to use, but you have to be thoughtful and careful about how you're using that. All right, so here we go. Now in this case, once again, I want this to be a bit more rounded. So I'm going to hit 3 for smooth preview. So it gives us this nice rounded shape here, right? And what I want to do is I want to make the back thinner here, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down right mouse button. And I'm going to go to face selection, right? I'm going to hold down right mouse button. I'm going to go to face. Now, remember, one of the things I showed you in the last video also is the drag select right here, right? Because if you just do left click drag, it's going to select a box. And whatever that box touches, and it's going to grab stuff on the other side. If you don't want the normal pick marquee where you just drag the box to do that, you turn camera based on, right? There's this little camera based selection here in modeling toolkit where you just click on these tabs. And then when you do the box select, it'll only grab what you see on the front, right? But there's another way to do this that is honestly fast and easy. And that way you can kind of leave camera base off for your pick marquee. And that is drag select, right? There's a quick key for that, tab. If you hold down tab on your keyboard, right? Tab on your keyboard, So I'm talking about cookies or shortcuts. I'm talking about your keyboard, right? So tab. And you see how as long as I hold down tab, drag select is on. And then all you have to do is hold down your left mouse button, right? Hold down the left mouse button and just move your cursor. And it drag selects, paint selects, if you will. That's a great fast way to do that. So I need to create more geometry here. And you probably remember this from when we were working on our bedpost sphere and even kind of that little top part of our lamp, right? So once again, like I said, really I'm not showing you anything new here. I've already introduced everything. I'm just trying to reinforce this stuff. To create new geometry, remember, you can just hit extrude. And you see how it kind of makes one, because there's new geometry here, right? And you see that this kind of new geometry is close to this one. It makes the smooth preview harder here. Now, in one, that's right on top of each other. That can cause problems, right? So I'm going to hit R for scale. I'm just going to scale it in just a little bit, right? Just a little bit. That way when you hit one, you see how there's a little bit of space there? You really don't want edge loops or edges occupying the exact same space. That can make certain tools like multi-cut or bevels behave weird later on. So anytime you extrude or anytime you put an edge loop in with multi-cut, it shouldn't go exactly on top of another existing edge loop. There should always be a little bit of space. It doesn't have to be a lot, right? It doesn't have to be a lot. It can be small, but there should be a little bit of space there. So this extrusion, and then I scaled it in just a little bit to get that little space. But you'll notice because these edge loops are really close to each other, it does make the rounding that the smooth preview does here sharper, right? If I move it further, so it becomes sharper still. If I make it smaller, so it becomes softer. So you can actually get nice kind of beveled edges with smooth preview. So I'm going to extrude again. I'm going to hit R for scale again because I don't really usually like the default manipulator extrude gives me. You'll see when we do the knobs, it's awesome. And when we do thicken, it's awesome, but oftentimes it's not. And usually your manipulator settings down here should be set to object or world, right? So you'll see right down here at the bottom modeling toolkit, you should see, you might need to scroll down if it's a little lower. You want to make sure this is set to world or object, right? Component and custom can do some neat stuff, and we'll see that a lot more later on, right? We actually saw a little bit of the edit pivot when we did our spokes. And we're going to see that a couple of times. Again, we have a fan to do, and we got wheels for our office chair to do. But I like just switching to the regular scale tool, R for scale. And I can just left-click drag on that center one and make that smaller, right? And you see how that's kind of creating this nice smaller cylinder with inside of this? And it's just the extrude tool. But we're using scale to make it smaller, right? So we've got that nice kind of lip there. We'll extrude again. And like I said, once again, I like to hit W for the regular move tool. Let's grab the blue arrow here. Remember, whatever the last active axis you used will be yellow. So in this case, if you don't see blue, you're just seeing green and red, that means the yellow one's the dark blue one. That's your Z-axis. We want to move back a little bit. Not a lot, because we want to keep that sharper there, so we keep those close to each other to make some more sharp angle there in Smooth Preview. So we'll hit extrude again, hit W for move it out. You see how it kind of keeps that shape a bit crisper, right? A bit sharper like this one. I'll do one more extrusion. W for move to use the regular move tool. Bring this one back. Now, I don't really need these in the back, right? This is going to kind of rest inside the lamp. So I can just hit delete with those selected. And you'll notice we've actually basically created a doorknob, haven't we? Right? Or a knob like we did. We actually kind of did this with a half sphere on our ends table, right? So remember, this stuff is always available. Now in this case, I don't want my knobs to be super close on there, right? So I can go to multi-cut. And I can hold down Control, right? Because remember, if you hold down Control when multi-cut's on, you can put an edge loop anywhere you want to on this, right? Even this way. Really don't want to do it this way, but we want to do it this way, right? So remember, you put your cursor over the edge in the direction you want to put it in. Remember that edge loop's going to go in perpendicular, right? So I can put an edge loop in there, and you see how that gets actually a bit sharper there, right? So I can turn multi-cut off. And what we can do is I can hold down right mouse button, go to edge. Remember, double left click on an edge to select an edge loop. W for our move tool. And if I move this closer, see how that gets a little sharper? If I move it away, it gets a little softer. So remember, it's the fact that these edge loops are getting close to other edge loops where there's a corner, right? When there's a corner on an object, that's where you see the smooth preview roundness the most. And by putting edge loops closer to other edge loops, it's making that smoothing smaller, right? That area where it's a corner becomes smaller. So the round becomes smaller and it looks more like a bevel, right? So it's kind of a neat little trick to kind of get that bevel effect with Smooth Preview. All right, I'm gonna hit F for frame selection since I've already got that edge of selecting. See how it sets that camera rotate around there? And I'm gonna go back to face mode, right? So I'm gonna hold down right mouse button and I'm gonna go to face selection. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna grab every other face on this one, right? So I'm gonna grab every other face. There we go. And now we have every other face. And you see how because I did 12, it's even, right? We skip a face, skip a face, skip a face. And then what we're going to do is we're going to extrude these to create the knobs. So we're going to extrude. Now in this case, I actually do want to move along normal direction, right? Because I want this face to move this direction. I want this face to move that direction. I want this face to move that direction there, right? So I want these faces to kind of move all in the proper directions, right? Remember, normal direction is really just the direction your face is pointing, right? This face is pointing this way. This face is pointing that way. This face is pointing that way. That's the normal directions. By default, your extrude tool, whether you see this more complicated version of it or the simplified version, right? Sometimes you'll see a version that's just the blue arrow and kind of like the light blue square here. That still basically gives you everything you want, right? So I left click, drag that blue arrow to move it out a little bit. And you see how these all move along their own directions? We've seen that when we thicken stuff, right? We've seen thicken a couple times. We're going to see it a couple more times before we're done this semester. I'm going to do one more extrusion now and grab that blue arrow to move it out. And there's our knobs. And believe it or not, this is basically how we're going to make the lower part of our office chair later on. So you're actually going to see this again, exactly, but just kind of more vertical this way instead of kind of horizontal. And we're getting to see that even if you're not thickening, sometimes extrude along normal direction is great for stuff like this. Kind of like a cog shape, right? So I'm going to hit Q to turn the extrude tool off. And that's going to be great for that switch, right? I can hold down right mouse button, object mode. Now in low res, it looks like crap, right? So remember, in object mode, right? Hold down right mouse button, object mode, we smooth. And now you see we actually have a pretty good looking switch in low res. And of course, I can select it in object mode, right? Hold down right mouse button, object mode. I can hit W for move. Now remember, you can move just up on the green and just over on the blue. But remember, you have these little squares also that move along just the two axes they're kind of parallel with. So see how if I left click drag, it just grabs those two axes to move them up there. And there's our switch. So that's how you can actually make a switch in Maya for the lamp. So I'll stop there for that video, and then we'll do the chord in the next video.